So, first thing we'd like you to do is give us your name again and spell your last name just to be safe.
Yeah, it's Malvin E. Walker, W-A-L-K-E-R.
So, Mal, where were you when Pearl Harbor happened, and what do you think?
I was in church, and when I came out of church, I heard about it on the radio.
So you're a young man at the time. Did you think that this was going to...
Well, I knew that things would be different. I didn't know how. I was just 20 years old then.
Well, talk about when you were drafted and how you felt about that. And...
Well, of course, I think everyone had a different conception of what people have nowadays. But we were anxious to get into service. And I entered at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis, and then was there, I think only 4 days. And then we were on a train. It was 10 days on the train, because as I understand it at the time, they had to move people around, and they had to stay on the train until there was an opening. But I went to Camp Walters, Texas, and for basic training. And then when I finished that, I went to the NCO school, which was also at Camp Walters. And then on January, I was sent to Fort Benjamin, or Fort Benning for OCS. I got my commission April 16th, 1943. And then I went to Camp Wheeler for a very short time, and then to Camp Blanding. And from there, we had a cadre to form the 63rd Division. And we moved from Florida then to Camp Van Dorn in Mississippi by truck. And there we received the men to fill out the division, 63rd Division. And then it was in December that I went to Ranger training. And then in March, I was given leave and then sent to England, arrived at Liverpool, and then went down to Bodmin, where the 29th Division was. And it was around May 1st, I think, we went into the, what they call sausages. It was an encampment, kind of sausage-shaped, and completely cut off from all outside contact, where we waited for the orders to go in to the ships and so forth. Of course, the officers got a briefing before the men did, and as to where we were going, what we would encounter. We were told that it would be a very easy job, that it was lightly defended by Polish, French, Russian, and some German troops. It was the 716th Division, German Division. Of course, in the meantime, it was in, I think about April, right around April, the 352nd Division, which had been on the Russian front, was regrouping in St. Lo, and they sent them up to the beach. And of course, they were the ones that we encountered. And the 716th then moved towards the Caen area. And we were told that the Air Force would make a terrific bombardment on the beach, neutralizing all the Atlantic Wall facilities. Well, they bombed 3 miles inland. They missed entirely the beach. All we had, as far as artillery was concerned at that time, were the ships, because all of our artillery had sunk. The men manning the guns made it in, but they were converted to infantry for the time being. And so all we had was small arms, rifles, machine guns, light and heavy, and 60 mortars and 81 millimeter mortars, but no artillery at all. We depended on the ships to support us in that way. And of course, we got on the ships about June 1st in England, and D-Day, of course, as you know, was scheduled for June 5th. And then this terrific storm came in the channel. And Eisenhower decided, finally, he got a notice from the Weather Bureau that there would be a short opening in on June 6th. So he said, finally, after much cogitating, said we go. And the waves are still 8 feet high. And we had set sail on June 4th and gone part way out to the line of departure, which was Piccadilly Circus, was called. And then we were recalled back to Plymouth, and then set sail again on June 5th, about 8 o'clock in the evening. And it's about 120 miles across the channel at that spot. And at the time, the seas were still rough, and
Mal,
yeah,
we got just a little problem.
yeah.
Your shoes are making
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I mean, I can take them off.
Okay, if you don't mind.
No,
It's because they're leather and maybe they're new.
well, they aren't too old.
I was kind of hoping it would stop on its own, but they.
Oh, yeah.
they
Well,
were-
I'm glad. But
So let's go back a little bit, if you don't mind.
to when?
Let's go back to being in the camps and just talk to us about, just pick it up from moving down from the camps to the ships and loading on and then going from
Yeah. Well, of course, in these isolated campsites, we moved out by truck down towards the southern coast. Well, we were pretty close to the coast anyway, but we moved down, and then finally got on a small landing craft, and from there there's a kind of a channel coming out, going into the English Channel, and we came through there and got on an LSI, number 353. And we were waiting then, of course. The men got on, the men were finally briefed, and we were, of course, in the sausage area. We were given French francs and all equipped, and a little pamphlet with French phrases, and so we knew what was coming. And we waited on ship, of course, and June 5th was the original date for actually, May 1st was the original date. But Eisenhower and Montgomery decided we needed another division, the 4th Division, for another landing. So they delayed a month in order to get enough equipment in to transport the 4th Division. And we set sail the night of June 4th out from Plymouth. And we got about to where the line of departure was, which was Piccadilly Circus name. And then got word to come back because of the weather conditions on the channel. And Eisenhower was informed by his weather man that there would be a short opening in the weather on June 6th. So he thought, well, he spent quite a bit of time talking and with the other commanders and Montgomery and so forth, and decided he just said, let's go. And actually, he wrote a letter, which he stuck in his pocket, indicating that if this failed, that he was entirely to blame. And it was, he just stuck in his pocket. Someone found it later. But anyway, on June 5th, then we set sail again, about 8 o'clock in the evening, crossed the line of departure. And of course, at this time, the airborne troops were flying overhead in a column 300 miles long. There were, I was trying to think of the number. There were about 6,000 planes in that. But anyway, this 300-mile long column, they started at midnight. And of course, they landed in very bad conditions in a 30-mile area. They were supposed to have concentrated areas, but the weather, it was foggy, and some of the pilots got, I don't know if they were disoriented or what, but they went off track, and it took the airborne some time to consolidate, and they were just in small groups here and there. At about 3:30 in the morning, the 116th Regiment, which was one of our other regiments, went over from their ship, the mothership, into landing craft and started out. It took about almost 3 hours for them to get from their mothership to the beach in 8-foot waves. Everyone was seasick. The little flat bottom landing craft were just up and down and sideways, and there's no way to escape being seasick. And shortly thereafter, the duplex drive tanks were launched. That's the ones that were fitted with canvas sides so they could go into the water like a boat. We were assigned 34, and only 3 made it to the beach. All the rest sank. So we had no tank support whatsoever. But the 116th then landed at 6:30 in the vicinity of Virval Drive, and they suffered tremendous casualties. Company A of the 116th lost 96% of their men in the first 15 minutes. Several of the landing craft were blown up by German 88s. We landed in the second wave on an LSI, landing ship infantry, number 353. And we were supposed to land in the vicinity of Les Milan, but due to the tide coming in and the currents and so forth, we were almost 2,000 yards east of there. And where the cemetery is today, the American cemetery, we landed right below that. And of course, all of the bluffs were in smoke from the artillery from the naval ship bombardment. And the grass, all the grass was on fire. The water was red. And we landed. We didn't lose too many in the landing. But of course, after we landed, we got into minefields. And it took, it was around noon before we could get on top of the bluffs. General assistant commander of the division landed at 9:30, and he was the one that kind of organized the beach. Without him, General Cota, I don't think, it was total confusion. I have the D-Day orders, and everything in that order is down to the minute what would happen. Nothing happened like that. It was complete chaos. There were no units completely landed in one spot, and it took time to get together. Some took 2 or 3 days to get together. But we finally got on top, and then this was in the 1st Division's area. The 29th was originally supposed to be west of that area, but the 116th was connected to the 1st Division for the landing. And then when the whole division came in, of course, it reverted to the 29th. And we went up this, it was kind of a narrow draw. I don't think it's there anymore. I can't find it. Up to where the cemetery is now located. And then that evening, the 1st Division, the 16th Regiment went east and we went west. And Colville-sur-Mer is where we were in the evening. And of course, this was the beginning of the hedgerow country. And that night, of course, there were all kinds of little probes by the Germans and so forth, counterattacks. But we managed to hold the town. And then on June 8th, we came to what was called the inundated area. It was a flooded area. At Isigny, there was it's not exactly a dam, but there's a gate. Every year, the channel would flood into this area. Well, they had built this gate to protect the area so the flood water wouldn't come in. But the Germans had opened that up. So this entire area, these fields were flooded. There was maybe 2 feet of water. But then there were also channels, 6 or 8 feet, located within this area. So if you'd start out and go in there, and we had to wait for weasels finally to take us across that area to Colombière. And we finally made it to Colombière. And then, of course, the hedgerows, many people think, well, like the hedgerows in England, or what we call hedges. Well, these are 8 to 10 feet tall, with trees growing on top, vegetation. And in the Saint-Lô area, there are 3,900 hedgerows in every 3-mile square area. They were, on an average, about a ½ acre each, with these hedgerows completely surrounding them. And of course, the roads came between in certain spots. The tanks couldn't use those roads because the Germans had all their 88s right there, so they'd knock a tank out as fast as they got on the road. But they'd try to go in these hedgerows. Finally, they got bulldozers to open up a little space and let a tank through. But it was the 3rd Armored, a sergeant in the 3rd Armored, that devised a scheme. On the beach, you know, there were these tetrahedrons and so forth made of steel. And he used those. He had them separated and put on the front of the tank with a sharp tooth to it. Well, the tank would go up to a hedgerow and go right through it. Well, one of these tanks came through where I was, and we took a prisoner. And he said he was waiting with his Panzerfaust for this tank to belly up so he could get it in the weak spot. He said it came right through the hedgerow. He says, that's enough for me. And he gave up. But we were supposed to get to Saint-Lô in 9 days. It took 43 because of these hedgerows. And of course, on June 19th, the worst storm in the English Channel happened, from 19th to 21st. And by the way, that would have been the next time, if June 6th had been canceled, that would have been the next time for D-Day. And that would have been a disaster. But it ruined the harbor, the
Mulberry.
Mulberry Harbor that was brought over from England, fabricated there to make a breakwater and a landing place for the ships so they could come on these floating roadways to the beach. Well, the American Mulberry was completely destroyed. The British one was only slightly. So we couldn't use that to bring in supplies. They had to bring supplies in on the landing craft or weasels or alligators, whatever they could get. So supplies were not what they should be at first. And it was rainy weather. June is usually rainy in Normandy. And it was just a matter of taking one hedgerow at a time. Well, on July 4th, we had our first relief to go back for a 2-day rest. And we went back to St. Clair, and we were right next to the field where the 155 houses were firing all day long. And I'll never forget, they showed us a movie. It was in a barn above an ammunition dump. And it was a song of Bernadette. I don't know if you know that movie, but it's not a very happy movie. But anyway, I still remember that. And then we went back to the line. And on June 11th, well, at midnight on June 11th, actually midnight of June 10th, the 3rd Panzer Division, German 3rd Panzer Division, attacked us. And we were supposed to make our attack at first light that morning. And of course that disrupted the whole, all the plans that were made. And it was, General Gerhardt was he was one of these fellows that pushed and go, go, go. And he was trying to get the 1st Battalion was supposed to lead off of the 3rd, of the 115th. And they weren't in any condition. They had been decimated. And so he told the 3rd Battalion, my battalion, to start. And it was about 1500, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we made our first approach down the hedgerow. And we got about halfway to the next hedgerow. And one of my sergeants, Sergeant Lanigan, was killed. And 2 or 3 others were wounded. And I was shot in the right arm. We had to pull back. So 2 hours later, we tried it again from another point. And this time, my whole platoon was wiped out, either killed or wounded, except my runner, Herman Dozier. He was the only one that wasn't wounded or killed. So then I was sent back to the hospital for 3 months in England, and the 61st General Hospital. It was not too far from Oxford. It was in the little town Burford. And on October 28th, I returned to the division. At this time, they were right on the German border at Bergen. And there, of course, the ground is entirely different, no hedgerows, completely flat. You could see for miles. You could be city here and city here and city here. You could see from their churches. And we fought. There were some pretty nasty battles fought in that area. One in particular was Seersdorf. We were at Baysweiler and moved out. It was about noon before we moved out. And of course, it's open ground all the way to Seersdorf. And halfway between, there's a wooded area, not too much, maybe, it may have been an acre of woods. And when we got to that area, the Germans opened up with artillery. and fired without stopping for 12 hours. There was no let up at all. And of course, all we could do is hunker down, get the best support we could. And we lost a lot of men. Earl Tweed, who had the company at that time, he was wounded. He's here, by the way.
We've actually already
Yeah.
talked to her.
And so as soon as, well, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning when they stopped shelling. About 4 o'clock, we tried to organize get together what we could so that we could start off early in the morning towards Searsdorf. And luckily, we had 2 tanks from the 2nd Harbor to go with us. And we managed to get into Searsdorf. And well, we had 2 first sergeants, Sergeant Marshall and the Sergeant Gilson. Sergeant Gilson was always up front with us. He liked to be up front. Sergeant Marshall stayed in the rear. But Sergeant Gilson, some of my other men, we went into the Searsdorf Castle and captured that. It was, I think it was a headquarters for one, I don't know what German unit, but we captured about 50 Germans in that castle. And then Searsdorf was by day's end, we had completely captured the town. And then the next morning we went off to Derbyslaar. And it was just maybe 2 miles from Searsdorf. And we got into the rear portion of Derbyslaar, the western side. And we had dug in on the side of a hill. And the Germans opened up with artillery on that hill. And I was completely covered with dirt from my waist down and couldn't get out. My men had to dig me out. But anyway, we took Derbyslaar. The Germans counterattacked that night, but the next morning we had that. And it was just, things went quicker in that area. And then we finally got to the Roar River. That was about the 1st of December. And at the Roar River, Jülich is just across the Roar River from on the eastern side of the bank. But by December 7th, we got up to the western bank. And Hassenfeld Gut was a strong, these are, a Gut in German is kind of an estate which is surrounded by walls and so forth. And that was a terrific battle we had getting into that Gut. The fields were mined all the way around. We lost a lot of good men. One man spent two days wounded in that minefield. But we finally got into the Gut, and then we went to Sportsplatz, which was just east or south of the Gut. And I had my headquarters in the basement of a building there as part of the Sportsplatz. And then we were supposed to, it was kind of a static position. And from then, of course, December 16th, you know, the Germans made the counteroffensive in what is now called the Battle's Bulge. And I remember very clearly on the 14th of December, we could hear tanks moving south. And I called back to the regiment and so forth and reported it. They poo-pooed it. But actually what it was, some of the units for the Battle of the Bulge were behind our area, and they were moving south to get down to that Luxembourg area, or Belgium area. And there were a lot of errors, I think, in the higher headquarters about what happened there. But anyway, when that happened, on December 16th. Of course, we were at the 9th Army at that time. First Army was south, but Bradley had both armies. But because of the bulge, they decided to give Montgomery in his 21st Army group all the units on the north, and we were on the north side, so we were with Montgomery for a short time there. And it was a rather static position until, well, you know, I think I've been told that the winter of '44 was the worst winter in history for that area. And of course, the Battle of the Bulge, they really suffered from it. But we moved from town to town, digging emplacements. So in case we have to pull back, we already have places there to go to. But luckily, the Germans didn't make any attacks other than the southern. December 24th, I'll never forget. We were dug in foxholes along the river near a pier. And right at midnight, the Germans started playing Christmas carols on a PA system. And of course, all the traditional Silent Night and all that. And then all of a sudden, here came White Christmas with Bing Crosby singing. And we thought that was probably a psychological ploy on their part. And it worked. But anyway, it was February then, before we crossed the Roar River. There had been several times we were supposed to. And then the Germans opened up the dam, Schwammühle Dam, which flooded the entire Roar Plain. And the water was just, well, it rose 38 feet. And so we had to delay about 2 weeks until that water subsided before we could even think about going across the Roar River. And finally, I think it's February 26th, I believe. No, 23rd, sorry. We made the crossing. And on the slope leading on the west or eastern side of the river was all mine. We lost several men going across. The 116th went to Jülich and we went to Broich, which is just maybe a half mile apart. And after we got across the Roar River, things were moving rapidly. We headed north. The Seersdorf Castle was before the Roar River. But then we headed north up to Krefeld and Mönchengladbach. And there's a suburb of Mönchengladbach called Wright, and that was Goebbels' hometown. And he had demanded the people of Wright present him with the castle in Wright. And of course, they gave it to him. And we captured that castle. And by the way, one of the first things we did was hold a ceremony for the Jewish members of our unit in that castle. And I have Goebbels' diary, and he has 5 entries talking about how he was so humiliated by all this. And he went to Hitler and said he wanted to send from Berlin a executional team into Wright to set things straight. Hitler agreed, but of course it never occurred. It never happened. But now I still have the flag from that castle. But and then we went into Mönchengladbach, and there we were put on 9th Army reserve, and we guarded the town of Mönchengladbach for a while. And then shortly thereafter, we went to the Rhine River at Rheinberg. We crossed the Rheinberg. And just across the river, we liberated a concentration camp. The name slips, town slips me right now. But it was mostly Russian prisoners. And of course, these concentration camps were terrible. And but from then on, we just moved rapidly eastward, and finally got near the Hamburg area. Not Hamburg, but Hamblin. And then you talked with General Ungelhatter, and Captain Lawson, who was our captain at that time, had sent Al south to Nordhausen to set up the housing situation. Well, he encountered the camp Dora Mittelbau Dora, which is at Nordhausen, which is where they were assembling the V-1, the V-2 rockets underground. And the prisoners there were in terrible condition. And I think he probably told you about his experience there. Then he came back, and we went from little town to little town to little town. We finally got to close to the Elbe River. And Captain Lawson told me, he said, you take your group north to the British Second Army and contact them, and then go down to Kleine-Kuren, which is right on the river. So I did that. We went by compass up to meet the British, and then came down along the river to Kleine-Kuren, and we set up a headquarters there. We took over a house and slept in beds with feather beds, which was a real comfort. And we stayed there not too long, and then they pulled us back. And we went from town to town going back west, and we'd set up military government in these little towns. And finally, back to Bremen. And 115th then took over Bremen. 116th went up to Bremerhaven. And I was made intelligence officer at this time, and appointed as town major of the city of Bremen, which I was there until January 1st, 1946. And Bremen had been destroyed partly, not like some of the cities, but luckily they didn't bomb Bremerhaven, the port, because they needed that port. But anyway, a lot of the civilians would go to Bremerhaven, to the port, because they knew it wouldn't get bombed. And but we had quite a time getting everything organized in Bremen, and blew up a lot of installations. I have at home 13 pages of single-spaced locations of things that had to be blown up, bunkers and all kinds of things. But and then, of course, on January 1st, on the Leif Erikson, we sailed back to New York. And what a sight it was when we came into view of the Statue of Liberty. That was real. We knew that. And I was separated shortly after. Went back to Indiana. And I was a musician. I got my bachelor's degree before I went into service. And I went ahead and got my master's in. And I played the cello in symphonies, several symphonies, and stayed in the reserves until '54. And I taught, of course, at the university. It's now Butler University, was Jordan Conservatory. And I always kept up with the war things. And I spent 20 years collecting. And by the way, I interviewed Traudl Junge, who was Hitler's personal secretary in Munich several times. She's a fascinating woman. And she was with him all the time, ate with him, and she did all his personal correspondence. Had nothing to do with the military side. And she had a different concept of him. She said he was like a father figure. But of course the military had another concept. She would say that the generals would go in and she'd hear all this screaming and yelling, and they'd come out all red-faced. And Hitler would come out a different person. And just like that, he'd change personality. And but I always said that Hitler was our greatest general because of all the mistakes that he made. And he took over all of the functions of displacement of units and so forth, and when they could move. On D-Day, of course, he was asleep until 3 o'clock the next afternoon, and he poo-pooed the whole thing. He thought we'd come in and Pas-de-Calais, and he wouldn't allow any of the 15th Armed German Army to come in to help the 7th Army. And Rommel was in Ulm, at his hometown. He wasn't on the beach. He didn't get there until late afternoon. But if Hitler had immediately sent those units, we would have been in awful trouble. And also, von Unstedt wouldn't allow he was the overall Western commander, wouldn't allow the tanks to be near the beach. They had to be back near, well, some in Paris and Saint-Lô and so forth. And of course, they couldn't move because of the air cover. But if they had been able to get up, Rommel wanted them right up at the beach, but Hitler wouldn't allow that either. So and all the things that Hitler did, his decisions, I think, helped us. His last effort, of course, was the Battle of the Bulge. And if it had succeeded, it would have split the forces, the Allied forces. But of course it didn't. And that was a disaster for them. So, that's
Great. You're great, Mal. And
Well,
now, let's go back. Let's
yeah.
talk about some...
Go over for one second and pick just,
yeah.
he was up above where we came in one of those machine gun nests. And I met him in 1999. He was at Veerville, at the draw there. And he came back, or comes back, every year on D-Day and visits the American Cemetery. And he and his father went into the roofing business after the war. I guess they made a fortune because all the roofs were gone.
Certainly enough work.
Yeah. And I interviewed Albert Speer, too. He was had a very great mind. He could recall things just like that. That was after he got out of prison, I saw him. Yeah. I think he was one of the more intelligent people in the whole regime.
Yeah, you wonder why he bought into it, but I guess...
Well, as a student, he was approached and went to hear Hitler talk, and right away he signed up. Everyone who saw Hitler said he had magnetic eyes, and That was after he got out of prison. Yeah. I think he was one of the more intelligent people on the whole regime.
Yeah, you wonder why he bought into it, but I guess he made
Well,
his choice.
as a student, he was approached and went to hear Hitler talk, and right away he signed up. Everyone who saw Hitler said he had magnetic eyes, and said that his personality would grab you. So I don't know what it was. But as a child, he was brought up Catholic, and he wanted to become a priest. And he would, in his home, put on a robe and stand on a stool and give sermons. And when he got to school, he would get all the boys together and talk about the Prussian wars. And then he was sent to a seminary, and he was kicked out of that for smoking. And from that time on, he never let anyone smoke in his presence. And of course, he became a vegetarian. He wouldn't eat any meat. And he had all kinds of ailments, I guess, and was on dope constantly. Dr. Morrell would every day give him dope. But Goering, well, he was on dope too, but he gave an interview when he was captured to the press, and everybody complained about that because they didn't think it should have been done. But I was in touch with a doctor from in Michigan who's written a book about the medical history of Hitler and so forth, and Goering. He has all the pictures of the prisoners with the rope, a piece of the rope from each hanging, and he started a museum.
It's kind of a gruesome.
Oh yeah. But
well, let's step back all the way to the 6th again,
Yeah.
if we could. And tell me if you could describe the panorama that's going on. You're sitting off the beach on this LCI, watching the 116th go in.
well, of course, we were 11 miles out.
Right.
Yeah, but we could see some, and of course, the number of planes flying over was fantastic. And it was about midnight before the moon shone through all these clouds. Finally, it was a full moon, but it was about midnight before that actually appeared. And to see all these planes going in ahead of us, we thought, oh boy, you know. And the number of ships is just fantastic.
You know, and you got the whole naval bombardment and the bombing
Yeah.
and everything from where you were 12 miles off must
Yeah.
have looked pretty impressive.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Did you think anybody was even going to be ashore?
Well, of course, we had a job to do, you know. We knew we had to do it. And, of course, we had no knowledge of what had happened to the 116th until later. But bodies were just all over the place. And the tide would wash them in. And maybe a 4-yard wide line of nothing but bodies as far as you could see. Of course, a lot of them were drowned. Some were, when the rafts went down, 10 feet of water. With all this equipment, they had no choice. They had no way of saving themselves. It was a fantastic achievement, but it had its drawbacks. And thank God it was successful. If it hadn't been, if D-Day had failed, who knows what the world would be like today? Because it would be a long time before it could be tried again.
You mentioned that your artillery was all gone. What happened to that artillery?
Sunk. Sunk.
Did you see some of the, I guess they were being in ducks mostly, weren't they?
Well, no, in some in LCVPs, they could get some, but a smaller craft, of course, but they sunk with all that weight and the high seas. But luckily the men got in, the artillerymen.
Can you tell me a little bit about, as you're going into the beach, what you could see in terms of obstacles and stuff? I know it's...
Well, the tide was low tide, and of course the obstacles were all evident at that time. But then when that tide comes in, it rises 18 feet. And when it's in, then the obstacles would be covered. And anything coming into those obstacles, they had teller mines on top of the stakes and the tetrahedrons and so forth, and the Belgian gates. And of course they'd blow it up. But, and of course, as I said, the hills were all smoky from fire from the naval guns. Now, some of the artillery did fire from the ships before they were sent in. And I think the Navy saved our lives, really, because we could contact the naval people for a target, and they would fire and hit it.
Tell me what you could see when you got up on top of this bluff around noon, looking both ways.
Well, of course, you could see all the ships and the debris. Of course, it was like a junkyard, you know, just all kinds of equipment on the beach and dead bodies. And it was a horrendous sight. And of course, south, it was, there was an old village, Saint Laurent, and we were concentrating on staying alive, really. We weren't thinking too much about other things. But when we go back to Normandy, it's a relief to see the green grass and entirely different, of course.
Do you think that's helped you guys make peace with?
I think so, yeah. And the Normandy people are just fantastic. They treat us like kings. They can't do enough for us. It's different down south in Paris and so forth, but in Normandy they're great. And we have actually an association in Saint-Lô, which is associated with our 29th Association. And they're helping sponsor this trip next June.
Now, you told me about getting hit in the arm the one day.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a little fuzzy. Was that the same day you were also wounded the second time?
Yeah.
What happened to you the second time?
Well, I was shot in both arms, both legs. And I had my sister-in-law gave me a Bible before I went overseas. She had a steel jacket. I always kept it in my breast pocket. When I got to the hospital, I found that a bullet had hit that. And if that had Bible hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here today.
It make you a believer quick.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I think without, well, I can't say definitely, but I would say 95% of the people, the soldiers and so forth, were real believers. And the most significant church services were the ones just held in a barn, not a fancy cathedral. And of course we went in with all our weapons and so forth. But gave us, and there's a camaraderie that I don't think you can compare it to anything in civilian life. It's just, you feel so close to these people. Your life is in their hands and their life is in your hands. And it's something you can't forget.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you how close as an infantry officer do you get to your platoon?
Very. This business of, well, I've heard on TV some of these programs where they interview these fellows, they hated their officers. Well, they were in the rear. They weren't in, it's altogether different up in the fighting area. There you're just one person. You don't wear insignia. You don't dare, because that's the first thing a German sniper would go for. And there's no condition to rank at all. You're just all one. The day I was wounded, just before I took off on the second time, there was a 4.2 chemical mortar observer who had a Thompson machine gun. And he said, "Can I go with you?" Which I don't think he should have done, but I said, "Sure, we're glad to have the extra firepower." Well, he wasn't wounded or anything. But when I went to the hospital, after I was ambulatory, they let us go on short trips. And I went to Oxford. And I was on this side of the street. This fellow across the street, hey, Lieutenant. I looked at him, couldn't figure out who it was. It was this same fellow. Now, how he recognized me, I'll never know. Because it was only about 15 minutes that he was with us. They declassified him for being up front with the units and made him go to the rear. But that was, I still don't know how he recognized me. It's just one of those funny things.
Now, you were cadre and trained the 62nd Division.
63rd.
63rd.
Al Ungelatter was too.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
And then you get pulled out and you sent over to the 29th.
Yeah.
And you train this group of guys, you're ready to go, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're with a whole different
Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
And you're new there.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
How were you received coming into the 29th?
No problems. The 29th is a great bunch of people.
How do you deal with, you've been wounded pretty seriously. You've been evacuated and just a couple, 3 months, you're pronounced fit to return to duty,
Yeah.
and they send you right back out
Yeah.
to the same situation that
Oh,
just
yeah.
almost cost you your life. How do you?
Well, I had a boy in my outfit that had been wounded 6 times and came back each time. You'd think after 6 times they'd send you to the rear, but and Hal Baumgartner was wounded 6 times on D-Day. Of course, he only was on the beach 24 hours, and then he was shot up all over his jaw and knee and back. But I think you probably talk with him.
I'm certainly trying to.
Yeah.
I've been trying to for 2 months. He's a tough guy to pin down.
Yeah. Well, he makes a lot of speeches all over, and he's written a book about. Oh, I did write a book on Hitler, the chronological encyclopedia of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich. It's out of print now, but there's a copy in the Caen Museum in France, and mostly museums and schools bought it. But in the back there are 800 short biographies of people connected with the
I have to say, you're the first cello player I've ever encountered that was a combat infantry.
Oh, really? Well, I gave up the bow for a rifle. Well, not a rifle, but a carbine.
What do you think was the most effective weapon that you had in your platoon?
Well, of course, we didn't have the heavy mortars. We just had the small mortars, the 60 millimeters. They weren't too accurate, but that's the most powerful thing we had. BAR was a great weapon.